Hey guys, tonight we're going to embark on a journey to uncover the untold stories, the darkest secrets of Queen Elizabeth I, a woman the whole world still praises. Let's forget the powerful and dignified queen from the history books. What's behind that magnificent mask? A series of horrific and shocking truths, the most terrible secrets of her life. We're going to peel back the layers on 12 of the most vile, shocking, and brutal secrets Elizabeth tried to bury. We'll explore a childhood filled with trauma, a ruthless personality, and cold political decisions. This isn't history. It's the authentic story of a queen full of contradictions, a woman who had to sacrifice so much to gain supreme power. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're willing, please let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now in the comments. I'd love to know who's joining us. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Terrifying truth number 1. The haunting relationship with stepfather Thomas Seymour. Elizabeth I's childhood stretched out like a golden silk carpet, opulent and radiant, draping the ancient palace halls in splendor. Each morning, she would awaken to the gentle touch of her ladies-in-waiting adjusting her robes of brocade and applying powder to her delicate features. Yet behind that luminous facade lurked a silent terror and an emotional wound that would never fully heal. When Henry VIII passed away, Elizabeth's final stepmother, the widowed Queen Catherine Parr, remarried Thomas Seymour, the brother of Jane Seymour and uncle to King Edward VI, and that union unleashed a profound dread in the young princess's life. Seymour, initially lauded as a talented duke with considerable influence at court, quickly fixated on the 14-year-old princess. His approach was not that of a kindly guardian, but of a predator cloaked in refinement. A moment's whim to playfully tickle her exposed shoulder or draw near her in the dim lamplight of her bedchamber transformed a fairy tale existence into a nightmare. Whenever Seymour appeared, the very air in Elizabeth's sleeping chamber grew heavy, as though the breath of demons had crept through the keyhole. At dusk, when the waning sunlight filtered through the ornate stained glass, Elizabeth would slowly remove her outer cloak, revealing the fine silk gown beneath. Then, like a poisonous gust, Seymour's shadow would enter the room. He would approach with the faint scent of jasmine on his wrists, yet his touch was anything but gentle. A simple tickle on her slender arm would send a jolt of horror coursing through her chest, reminding her that someone was toying with her most intimate feelings. On one occasion, Seymour brazenly walked into Elizabeth's bedchamber before she could don her undergarment. A fleeting smile danced across his lips as though he were savouring a costly gift. Elizabeth trembled, tears glistening in her eyes, and rushed to shield herself with her small arms. At times, she sought refuge behind the heavy velvet curtains, but Seymour would still trail the warmth of her skin, betraying her attempts at concealment. Humiliation and panic intertwined, leaving Elizabeth with a desperate wish to vanish, yet she remained imprisoned within the gilded palace walls. When Catherine Parr observed her daughter's tear-filled eyes and quivering silhouette, she immediately sensed that something was terribly wrong. She stood in the dim corridor, issuing orders for the guards to secure every entrance before removing Elizabeth from Seymour's presence. The princess was escorted to another wing of the palace under the strict supervision of a trusted countess. That secluded chamber was so silent it felt eerie. The night breeze rustled through the latticework, whispering, "Be vigilant. Control has slipped away." Just when Elizabeth might have hoped for respite, bitter rumours spread that the princess was with child by her stepfather. The ladies-in-waiting murmured softly behind closed doors. "They say she's expecting. Her belly seems a bit swollen." Those unfounded whispers were like hidden knives, slicing through Elizabeth's dignity with each sly remark. She became too ashamed even to meet another's gaze, every scrutinizing look a fresh wound reopening the pain of her ordeal. Years later, when Elizabeth stood atop the pinnacle of power, she could not shake the memory of Seymour's approach in the twilight. Psychologists and historians contend that this trauma planted the seeds of her vow never to Wednesday. Her pronouncement, "I shall have but one husband here, and that is the realm of England," was more than a defiant declaration. It was a muted sigh from a heart that had endured too much anguish. By fortifying her heart and closing her emotional gates, Elizabeth fashioned herself into the Virgin Queen, donning that title like a suit of armor to ward off any chance of reliving her cruel past. Each night, when candlelight flickered and silence enveloped the palace, Elizabeth would sit before her gilded mirror, meticulously arranging her auburn locks, her gaze distant. She would gently touch the locket engraved with the letters T and S, a symbol of Thomas Seymour, and feel an ache in her chest. Though she had banished him from her life, the sensation of his fingers on her collarbone lingered in every breath. Even the unshakable throne could not cloak the spectre of her past from haunting her. From that harrowing experience, Elizabeth deftly transformed fear into political strength. She realized that only through solitude and freedom from personal ties could she wield authority in a male-dominated society. The Seymour ordeal engraved in her the terror of physical violation and the sting of false gossip, driving her to seek the throne as her sole sanctuary. The figure of Elizabeth I, both majestic and solitary, emerged from those shattered fragments of childhood. Though she reigned with unrivaled grace and power, she forever bore the mark of betrayal and fear, shaping her into one of history's most complex, profound, and poignant monarchs. Terrifying truth number 2. The terrifying rage and authoritarian nature. Imagine, if you will, a grand hall in Whitehall Palace. In the late 16th century, torchlight flickering against tapestries heavy with Tudor roses, the hush of courtiers barely masking the tension in the air. The year is 1582, and Elizabeth I presides over her court with an authority so absolute that even the bravest gentlemen bow their heads at her approach. Yet behind that veneer of regal composure simmers a tempestuous rage, an anger so fierce, so unpredictable, that a single misstep by even the most humble attendant can summon a fury darker than midnight. Elizabeth, known to her subjects as Good Queen Bess, cultivated a public image of benevolence and wit, entertaining ambassadors with eloquent speeches and clever repartee. But private audiences often revealed a different side. A woman who demanded unquestioning obedience, whose will was law, and whose displeasure could turn a splendid chamber into a stage for terror. When her dictates went unheeded, the Queen's temper flared like the light of 100 torches, scorching the souls of those who dared defy her. One of the most harrowing demonstrations of Elizabeth's wrath involved her own second cousin, Mary Shelton. Mary, a lady-in-waiting whose loyalty had once been unquestioned, chose to marry John Scudamore in secret, without seeking the Queen's consent. The moment Elizabeth discovered the clandestine union, she summoned Mary to the Privy Chamber, where the air was thick with dread. Without uttering a single word of reproach, Elizabeth lifted a plain wooden hairbrush, an object so innocuous in ordinance, but so fearsome in her hand, and struck Mary's hand with such force that a bone snapped. The sickening crack echoed through the chamber, silencing even the rustle of silk gowns, as Mary clutched her shattered hand, eyes wide with shock. Elizabeth's gaze remained icy and unyielding, her lips pressed into a thin line, betraying no hint of regret. In that grim instant, Elizabeth demonstrated that blood ties were no shield against her indignation. No cousin, no matter how devoted, could presume immunity from royal ire. The Queen's violence served as a stark proclamation. Her authority was absolute, and any challenge, however personal, would be met with ruthless retribution. The trauma of that day became whispered legend, a cautionary tale that courtiers repeated in hushed tones long after Mary's broken hand had healed. Psychologists and historians alike argue that this ferocity had deep roots. In a society where female sovereignty was still regarded with suspicion, Elizabeth faced the constant pressure of proving her worth in a man's world. Her mother, Anne Boleyn, had paid the ultimate price for royal displeasure, executed on charges that now seem flimsy. Her stepfather, Thomas Seymour, had violated her trust in her formative years, leaving emotional scars that never fully healed. These early experiences of vulnerability and betrayal forged in Elizabeth a resolute determination to never appear weak. To maintain her grip on power, she learned that fear could be as potent a tool as affection. By wielding her temper like a double-edged sword, Elizabeth crafted an image of the Virgin Queen, a ruler unencumbered by personal attachments, singularly devoted to her realm. Her fits of rage served to reinforce the distance between monarch and subject, ensuring that courtiers remained cautious and compliant. Through this strategic display of anger, she established boundaries so absolute that few dared approach her with anything less than the utmost deference. In fact, it was said that even the boldest noblemen would avert their gaze when she stood, as though her displeasure might scorch the air itself. Yet in spite of, or perhaps because of this severity, Elizabeth's reign is often remembered as a golden age. Her temper, terrifying though it could be, underscored a vital truth: that a monarch's authority rests not solely on kindness or generosity, but on the recognition that she commands the power to punish without restraint. This paradoxical blend of mercy and menace drew the admiration of foreign envoys and solidified the loyalty of her subjects, who knew that the rewards of service could be great, but the cost of disobedience far greater. It is worth noting that Elizabeth's anger was rarely indiscriminate. She reserved her most severe outbursts for those she believed had betrayed her trust, those who, in her eyes, threatened not just protocol, but the very stability of her realm. By personalizing punishment, she sent a clear message. Loyalty was paramount, and any breach, whether marital or political, would be answered with uncompromising force. In doing so, she melded her personal vendettas with statecraft, transforming private rage into public policy. As the candles guttered in the dusk of her court, courtiers would exchange anxious glances, recalling Mary Shelton's shattered finger, and imagining what might happen to the next unfortunate soul who dared defy the Queen's will. In that dim glow, Elizabeth's reputation as the Iron Queen was born a sovereign, whose kindness warmed her people, but whose fury could freeze the blood of any who crossed her. Thus, the second terrifying truth of Elizabeth I emerges. Behind the genteel facade of Good Queen Bess lay a ruler whose wrath was swift and merciless, a woman who understood that absolute power required absolute obedience. Her tempestuous nature, born of personal trauma and hardened by political necessity, became a cornerstone of her authority, ensuring that her reign endured as a monument to both her benevolence and her ferocity. In this way, Elizabeth I secured her legacy as a bloodthirsty queen, in the annals of history one whose anger, though dreadful, was an integral part of the force that shaped an empire. Terrifying truth number 3. The Virgin Queen with secret loves and ruthlessness. Imagine, if you will, a late evening in the candlelit privy chamber of Whitehall Palace, the hush of silk gowns rustling as courtiers drift from one shadowed corner to another. The year is 1593, and Elizabeth I sits alone by a polished oak table, her face softly illuminated by a single tallow candle. She is known throughout Christendom as the Virgin Queen, having publicly declared that she will have but one husband, her realm of England, and no master. Yet behind that solemn vow lies a tangled web of secret loves and heartbreaking betrayals, a life of passion tempered by an iron will, and a capacity for ruthless decision-making that few can comprehend. From the moment she declared her intention to remain unwed, Elizabeth's heart did not close entirely. One figure stood apart from all others: Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, her closest confidant and trusted advisor for decades. Their bond transcended mere friendship or counsel. It was prismatic, combining political alliance with profound emotional attachment. They discussed matters of state in hushed tones, shared a private language of glances, and found comfort in one another's presence. Yet, despite their closeness, the promise of marriage was never fulfilled. Elizabeth's loyalty to her realm outweighed her personal longing, and her vow of virginity remained unbroken. Then came the day Robert Dudley secretly married another. When word reached Elizabeth, her famously temperamental spirit was momentarily unleashed. In the secluded privacy of her chambers, her usually steady hands trembled with fury. Yet, contrary to expectations, she restrained herself and eventually forgave Dudley, allowing their alliance and their unspoken attachment to endure. He became a widower soon thereafter, and many courtiers whispered that Elizabeth would seize this chance to wed her beloved Earl. But she remained steadfast, preserving her image as the Virgin Queen and ensuring that no earthly marriage could compromise her sovereignty. Elizabeth's emotional landscape was not limited to Dudley alone. She cultivated flirtations and affections with several prominent figures, including the Duke of Anjou, Sir Walter Raleigh, and the gallant Thomas Heneage. Each relationship was carefully balanced between the personal and the political, providing warmth and distraction without threatening the firm grip she maintained on the throne. These liaisons allowed her to project an ideal, an untouchable monarch capable of romance, yet never wholly subject to it. In her later years, the intensity of those intrigues took on a new dimension when she lavished attention on Robert Devereux, second Earl of Essex and stepson to Robert Dudley. He was 33 years her junior, brimming with ambition and charm, and Elizabeth's fascination with him was palpable. She rewarded him with honours and gifts, whispered words of encouragement, and indulged his daring exploits. His successes against England's foes brought her pride. His failures, however, threatened the stability she cherished. Tragically, Essex's ambition led him down a treasonous path. He assembled a faction of discontented nobles and mounted a rebellion aimed at toppling his sovereign. When news of the plot reached Elizabeth, she felt the sting of personal betrayal like a dagger to the heart. The man she had protected, nurtured, and perhaps even loved, had turned against her. In a defining moment, she chose the crown over her emotions. With a steady voice laced with sorrow and resolve, she signed the warrant for Essex's execution. His death sentence was a chilling testament to her belief that love could never eclipse loyalty to the realm. This fateful act revealed Elizabeth's central truth about love. It is a double-edged sword. Affection can reinforce bonds of loyalty and service, but it can also become a vulnerability, a threat requiring the ultimate safeguard. By employing personal trust as both carrot and stick, she ensured that her favourites knew the cost of betrayal. In Essex's execution, she sent a crystal-clear message that her throne admitted no exceptions, that even those closest to her heart were not exempt from royal justice. Psychologists suggest that Elizabeth's strategic use of love and punishment stemmed from her early experiences of trust betrayed. Having endured the painful memory of her stepfather's predatory behaviour and the anguish of her mother's execution, she associated intimacy with risk. By keeping her suitors and favourites close, but always under her control, she prevented any emotional dependency from undermining her authority. The execution of Essex thus served not only as a political necessity, but as a psychological safeguard, an assertion that her sovereignty, once accepted, must never be questioned. Courtiers who walked the dimly lit corridors in the days after Essex's downfall spoke in muted tones, recalling the Queen's calm composure as she heard the cart wheels retreat from the palace gate. In that hush, they understood that Elizabeth's willingness to sacrifice personal attachments was integral to her endurance as monarch. The Virgin Queen persona was more than a public stance. It was a protective shell forged in the crucible of trauma and tempered by the exigencies of rule. Despite the harshness of her response to Essex's insurrection, Elizabeth's reign continued to flourish. Her deft navigation of courtly passions, her readiness to offer affection that comforted but never compromised, and her unflinching resolve to punish betrayal all contributed to an era of stability and cultural flowering. Beneath the layers of silk and brocade, the heart of a solitary ruler beats steady, vigilant, and resolute. Thus emerges the third terrifying truth of Elizabeth I, the paradox of the Virgin Queen, whose secret loves were matched only by her capacity for ruthless retribution. Love, in her hands, became both tool and weapon, binding those who served her and striking down those who faltered. By mastering her own emotions and using them as instruments of statecraft, Elizabeth ensured that her reign would endure as a testament to the strength required of a woman who refused to surrender her crown or her heart to any but England alone. Terrifying truth number 4. The Queen's vulgar swearing habit. Imagine, if you will, the grand, candle-lit chambers of the Tudor court, where courtiers in sumptuous silk and velvet rustle past, their whispers mingling with the soft clink of silver goblets. In the midst of this glittering pageantry, Elizabeth I, resplendent in her finest gowns, her elaborate wig piled high with pearls and ribbons, would sometimes unleash a stream of profanity so startling, so unrefined, that the staid, solemn ministers and ambassadors might freeze in mid-step, jaws slack, at the unexpected eruption of coarse language from the mouth of a queen. For all her reputation as Good Queen Bess, known for her erudition, diplomacy, and courtly grace, Elizabeth harboured a penchant for profanity that stood in direct opposition to the decorum expected of a reigning monarch in a patriarchal society. Contemporary accounts record that she swore like a drunken sailor, particularly when roused by frustration or when matters of state threatened to fray the threads of her patience. A misrouted dispatch, a tardy attendant, or a rebel baron's insolence could prompt her to let loose a volley of expletives so rich and unexpected that even hardened courtiers, accustomed to tension and intrigue, would blink in astonishment. Historians often suggest that Elizabeth learned the ropes of coarse speech from her father, Henry VIII, who himself was infamous for his crude outbursts and bold, earthy language. Yet whereas Henry's swearing was often fueled by drunken fits of rage or vindictive temper when crossed, Elizabeth's use of profanity felt more strategic, an audacious reclaiming of speech conventions that allowed her to sit on par, tongue to tongue with tough male courtiers, in a world that insisted women, especially queens, speak in measured, gentle tones. Elizabeth's cursing was a deliberate flouting of gender norms. By adopting language deemed rude or uncouth, she both surprised and intimidated her audience, asserting that her authority was not to be trifled with. In many ways, Elizabeth's fondness for coarse language served as a psychological tool. When a queen renowned for her composure and courtly elegance suddenly bellowed a four-letter word or a brusque insult, listeners were caught off guard. Their reflexive respect wavered as they struggled to process that the exalted sovereign, draped in ermine and lace, could so readily resort to expletives. This element of surprise amplified her presence, making her temper feel more potent, more unpredictable. It was a stark reminder that her power extended beyond the ceremonial. It resided in her command of words, whether polished or profane. Elizabeth's swear words did more than shock. They exposed a more human, unvarnished side of her character. They hinted at a woman who, despite the trappings of monarchy, tiaras of jewels, robes of cloth of gold, did not shrink from speaking in the blunt, earthy vernacular of everyday folk. In doing so, she brought a touch of the common world into the rarefied atmosphere of the throne room. She communicated that her identity lay not only in royal birthright and political acumen, but also in a wry acknowledgement of human imperfection. A queen who could swig a goblet of wine one moment and let flies of vulgar speech buzz around her next, presented a complex, memorable portrait, tantalizing to her subjects and to posterity. The deliberate breaking of courtly speech codes also functioned as a means of crowd control. A well-timed expletive could redirect a restless assembly's focus, seize their attention more effectively than any ceremonial speech. When Elizabeth dropped a blunt insult or swore her displeasure, the courtiers froze, uncertain how to respond, granting her a psychological advantage. In that pause between shock and recovery, she reasserted her dominance, reinforcing the message that she, not custom, not convention, set the terms of engagement in her court. Yet for all its shock value, Elizabeth's swearing never undermined her authority. Rather, it enhanced it. She was not a queen who stumbled over her words or forgot her place. She wielded profanity with precision. It was as if she recognized that in a court filled with flattery and formal speeches, a touch of raw honesty, however, crass, could resonate more deeply. Her willingness to use language deemed vulgar or lowly underscored her confidence. She knew her reign depended not on flawless etiquette alone, but on the ability to connect with hearts and minds through unexpected candor. Moreover, this habit contributed to Elizabeth's enduring mystique. Writers and diarists who recorded her outbursts did so with a mixture of shock and admiration, preserving anecdotes that would echo through the centuries. Tales of a queen swearing like a sailor became part of her legend, a reminder that even the most powerful monarch could harbor a mischievous, earthy streak. The image of Elizabeth, draped in brocade, suddenly letting fly a colourful curse, endures as one of the most vivid reminders that authority can embrace both majesty and humanity. In sum, the fourth terrifying truth about Elizabeth I reveals a sovereign unafraid to be herself, even if that self-used language considered unseemly for a woman in her position. Her penchant for swearing functioned as a means of asserting equality with her male counterparts, a tool for psychological control, and a window into her unfiltered, multifaceted personality. By bridging the gap between the refined and the raw, Elizabeth crafted a unique and unforgettable royal presence, one that lingered in the minds of courtiers and chroniclers alike, ensuring that the Virgin Queen would never be remembered as merely polite, but as boldly human and fiercely indomitable. Terrifying truth number 5. Secret motherly love for Anne Boleyn. In the dim morning light of Whitehall Palace, when the hush of dawn still clung to the corridors like a soft veil, Elizabeth I would often pause before a small, unadorned silver chest. Inside lay a simple pendant engraved with the letters A and B, her mother's initials, a cryptic reminder of the woman who had given her life and then lost it to the severed politics of the Tudor court. Anne Boleyn, the only mother Elizabeth ever knew, was executed in the year 1536 on charges of treason and witchcraft, charges that now seem flimsy and contrived. Yet long after the axe fell, sending her mother's head tumbling into history, Elizabeth carried Anne's memory close to her heart, guarding it as a secret talisman against the world's betrayals. Elizabeth's childhood was overshadowed by the violent erasure of Anne Boleyn's legacy. In the days following her mother's execution, the court moved swiftly to obliterate every trace of Anne's existence, her portraits painted over, her name scrubbed from records, her allies purged or exiled. To acknowledge Anne Boleyn was to risk suspicion, even danger. And yet, when Elizabeth became queen, she quietly but deliberately honoured those who had remained loyal to her mother in that dark hour. She bestowed lands and titles on a handful of courtiers known to have spoken kindly of Anne, effectively rewriting history in their favour. Such acts of patronage were not grand ceremonies but discreet interventions, grants recorded in the margins of royal ledgers, gifts delivered in the dead of night, words of thanks whispered in private antechambers. In her official portraits, Elizabeth often wore that silver pendant over her gown of crimson velvet or elegantly embroidered satin. To the untrained eye, it was simply a fashionable accessory, a nod to the vogue for personal emblems and monograms. But to those who knew, the presence of the letters A and B standing unmistakably for Anne Boleyn was a bold statement of filial devotion, a queen's silent protest against the court's campaign of obliteration. Even the faintest glint of the pendant in candlelight could send a ripple of recognition through the ranks of her council, a muted declaration that Elizabeth had not forgotten her mother's sacrifice. Such gestures were fraught with political risk. By honouring Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth risked offending factions still loyal to her mother's successor wives and to the old fears of heresy. The Habsburg ambassadors, for instance, who eyed Anne's fall as proof of England's volatility, might view such loyalty as a sign that Elizabeth would align herself with forces hostile to the Spanish alliance. Yet she persisted, valuing her personal truth above the safer path of forgetfulness. The Queen's steadfastness revealed an inner strength rooted in maternal love, loyalty not merely to the crown, but to the memory of a woman regarded by many as a traitor. Psychologists have noted that this secret devotion functioned as a source of resilience for Elizabeth. The pendant, the discreet grants of favour, and the unspoken acknowledgements of Anne's loyalists created a private support system in a world where every public move was scrutinised. By nurturing the memory of her mother, Elizabeth maintained a connection to her own origins, a bulwark against the isolation of sovereignty. That secret bond, forged in childhood trauma, transformed into a sustaining force that carried her through crises of state, from the threat of invasion to internal conspiracies. The symbolism of the and B pendant also spoke to Elizabeth's desire to blend strength with empathy. She was the monarch who forced the sea to kneel at the Spanish Armada's defeat, yet she also demonstrated profound humanness by quietly memorializing her mother. This duality iron, while tempered by tender remembrance, distinguished her reign. While courtiers might fear her strategic brilliance or her capacity for decisive punishment, they could also glimpse in that pendant a woman guided by love and loyalty, even in the face of immense personal loss. In private, Elizabeth would sometimes clasp the pendant and close her eyes, as though tuning her mind to the past. The softness of the silver against her skin, the slight weight of it resting at her collarbone, reminded her that she was not merely a symbol of royal authority, but the daughter of a mother who died for power's caprices. Those quiet moments of reflection nurtured her capacity for compassion. She would later intervene to mitigate the sentences of condemned prisoners, citing mercy as a royal prerogative. In so doing, she invoked the memory of the mother who, despite her own fate, had taught her the value of humane restraint. Elizabeth's secret motherly love also informed her policies toward women in her realm. She established scholarships for young gentlewomen, supported convent schools, and codified laws protecting widows' rights to their dowries. While these measures advanced her political goals, they also echoed Anne Boleyn's own patronage of women's education and autonomy. By institutionalizing such policies, Elizabeth extended her mother's influence beyond the private sphere, weaving Anne's values into the fabric of English governance. And yet, every time Elizabeth affirmed her mother's legacy, she risked reigniting the old controversies. The clergy, always wary of heresy and rebellion, watched her correlation between private memory and public policy with suspicion. They whispered that Anne Boleyn's ghost still haunted the palace, directing the Queen's hand. Elizabeth, however, ignored such superstitions, knowing that her mother's survival in her heart was far more powerful than any courtly rumour. In the twilight of her life, when her steps grew slower and her gaze more introspective, Elizabeth would call her most trusted ladies in waiting to her bedside. She would clasp their hands and ask after their families, discreetly ensuring that any who had once sheltered or defended Anne were remembered in her will. These final acts of loyalty, recorded in private letters and hidden codicils, cemented a legacy of motherly devotion that outlasted even the most glittering of her state affairs. Thus unfolds the fifth terrifying truth of Elizabeth I. Beneath the crown of pearls and velvet lay a daughter's unwavering love for a mother, stripped of dignity and subjected to injustice. Elizabeth's secret motherly devotion for Anne Boleyn was not a mere sentimental whim, but a strategic fortress of the heart, anchoring her through storms of politics and betrayal. It was a testament to the enduring power of maternal love, shaping a queen's humanity amidst the iron demands of empire. Terrifying truth number 6. Decayed black teeth from a sweet tooth. Throughout her reign, Elizabeth I treated white sugar as the ultimate symbol of status and refinement. In the 16th century, only royalty and the upper echelons of society could afford the expensive imports of honey, preserves, sugared cakes, and finely sweetened drinks. Elizabeth seized every opportunity to indulge. She hosted lavish tea parties, grand galas, and sumptuous royal feasts brimming with candied almonds, honeyed pastries, fruit preserves, and other confections so rare that the majority of her subjects had never even tasted them. Yet behind the glittering veneer of gourmet extravagance lay a grim reality. Elizabeth's relentless sweet consumption took an enormous toll on her teeth. By the end of her life, her remaining teeth were blackened and rotting to such an extent that she dared not open her mouth in a smile. Picture a royal banquet hall at Whitehall, the torches casting flickering light on silver platters piled high with sugared fruits and marzipan sculptures. The courtiers, dressed in their finest silks, formed delicate lines to sample the Queen's latest confections. Meanwhile, Elizabeth herself, draped in sumptuous brocade and wearing a wig of brilliant white, would discreetly reach for a small plate of crystallized sugar cubes, nibbling them at her leisure between audiences. This was not mere gluttony. It was a statement of supremacy. Only she could partake of such luxuries in such abundance. But as the years passed, the hidden cost of this indulgence manifested in the most intimate aspect of her royal personage: her teeth. Medical historians now agree that the combination of ignorance regarding dental hygiene and a diet extraordinarily high in both refined white sugar and unrefined treacle, a type of molasses, created a perfect environment for oral bacteria to flourish. The sugars stuck to the enamel, feeding the bacteria that slowly eroded the protective outer layer of her teeth. It was not only sugar, dried fruits, honey-laden pastries, and thick jellies clung to her molars and crevices. And with no effective method of daily tooth cleaning, the decay spread relentlessly. Imagine Elizabeth in her private chambers, the morning light sifting through the stained glass. She might pause before a highly polished silver mirror, her face framed by the powdered linen of her wig. Then, with a scarf or handkerchief raised to her lips, she would offer audiences a polite, closed-mouth greeting. To onlookers, it seemed simply a matter of etiquette, but in reality it was a necessary concealment of a horrid truth. Her teeth were black stumps of decay. The image of a monarch so powerful that entire fleets and armies bowed to her, yet so vulnerable to the ravages of sugar and time, was a stark illustration of human frailty even for a sovereign. Psychologists suggest that Elizabeth's decision to hide her smile behind veils or scarves may have intensified her sense of insecurity about her own image. Despite her unmatched authority and the deference she commanded on the political stage, she was still subject to the same biological laws as any woman of her time. She yearned for beauty and confidence, yet felt compelled to mask the most glaring imperfection of all. Each public appearance, draped in silks and clutching a lace-edged handkerchief, subtly underscored the dichotomy between her regal composure and a personal fragility. This dental tragedy also had political overtones. In an era where royal appearance played a critical role in maintaining prestige, the Queen's inability to present a radiant, toothy smile could be interpreted as a weakening of the divine right she so carefully cultivated. Portrait painters were instructed to render her with smooth, flawless teeth, and indeed, most surviving paintings depict Elizabeth with an idealized, unblemished grin. Yet the juxtaposition of official portraits and whispered court rumors about her blackened teeth fueled a quiet fascination among her courtiers, further humanizing her in their eyes. They recognized that the woman who could command nations to war was not immune to the simplest, most universal of ailments. Elizabeth's own correspondence hints at her awareness of this contradiction. In letters to her ladies-in-waiting, she occasionally apologized for her reluctance to engage in close conversation, citing a faintness of smile. These veiled references speak volumes. They betray a queen who knew the power of personal charm, and yet felt betrayed by her own body. Each stifled grin was a reminder that beneath the layers of brocade, pearls, and powdered wig, she remained subject to decay and mortality. Modern dental experts note that, had Elizabeth lived in an era with toothpaste and toothbrushes, her fate might have been different. But in the 16th century, oral hygiene was rudimentary. Mouth rinses consisted of vinegar mixed with herbs, and toothpicks were crude and uneven at best. No royal decree could mandate a preventive dental regimen, because none existed. Thus, Elizabeth's beloved sweet tooth, once a symbol of limitless privilege, became an instrument of silent torment. By examining the Queen's hidden affliction, we gain a more compassionate perspective on her reign. She was not merely a resolute sovereign who triumphed over the Spanish Armada or outmaneuvered foreign plots. She was also a woman cognizant of her own imperfections. Her decision to conceal her decaying teeth rather than confront the scandal directly underscores her understanding of the optics of power, how one small flaw could be magnified into a crisis of authority in the court of public opinion. In the final years of her life, Elizabeth rarely attended public feasts, preferring smaller, more private gatherings. These intimate events allowed her to enjoy her beloved sweets while minimizing the risk of exposure. Yet even in these moments of comfort, the spectre of her black teeth hovered, a constant reminder of mortality's reach. Thus emerges the sixth terrifying truth of Elizabeth I. For all her majesty and might, she was not immune to the corrosive effects of sugar, nor to the insecurities that arise when one's greatest pleasure becomes a source of shame. Her decaying black teeth stand as a poignant testament to the complex humanity of a woman who held the fate of an empire in her hands, yet struggled with the simplest need for a healthy smile. Terrifying truth number 7. Narrow escape from the executioner under her hearth. Sister's reign. Imagine the damp chill of the Tower of London's stone walls, where moss creeps through the cracks and a dying candle barely illuminates the narrow cell. The year is 1553, and the sudden death of King Edward VI has sent shockwaves through the realm. In the ensuing scramble for the throne, Lady Jane Grey is crowned, only to be deposed in less than 2 weeks, her brief reign forever remembered as the 9 Days Queen. It is in the chaos that follows that Mary I, Elizabeth's half-sister, ascends as Bloody Mary, earning her epithet through the ruthless persecution of Protestant dissenters. Yet Mary's harsh policies pale in comparison to the terror Elizabeth would face. 2 long months imprisoned in the Tower, her very life hanging by a slender thread, threatened by the cold edge of the executioner's axe. From the moment Elizabeth was accused of complicity in the rebellion, her world constricted to a narrow cell where guards' boots echoed like drumbeats of doom. Charged with treason, she stood in a perilous limbo. If she could not persuade Mary of her innocence, she would be led to the block without mercy or ceremony. Each waking hour in that grim fortress was steeped in dread, a constant reminder of the blade poised to descend. The psychological impact of such proximity to death forged within Elizabeth a profound understanding of the fragility of power. The crown could be bestowed in a moment and ripped away in the next. When Elizabeth first heard the clank of iron bars sealing her cell door, her heart must have pounded with disbelief. She, the presumptive heir next in line, now a prisoner in the same fortress that had seen countless traitors meet their end. The Tower's grim reputation, its echoing corridors and macabre scaffold yard, took on a menacing presence, as though the ghosts of those executed whispered warnings through the walls. For a fortnight, Elizabeth faced an existence of uncertainty, her meals of bread and watered wine offering little comfort, her nights filled with the distant roll of drums and the muffled shouts of sentries. Yet it was not merely the Spartan conditions that terrorized Elizabeth, but the knowledge that Mary's infamous resolve allowed no room for doubt. Mary's zeal to stamp out Protestant heresy and secure her authority meant that any perceived threat would be crushed without hesitation. Elizabeth was acutely aware that a single misstep, a wrong word to a guard, or an unfortunate glance, could be construed as guilt and trigger her execution. The spectre of the axe loomed larger than the tower's highest battlements. Each day she survived felt like a reprieve granted by fate itself. It was only Elizabeth's composure and deft humility that saved her life. When Mary finally summoned her for a private audience, Elizabeth bowed deeply and delivered a measured apology for any misunderstanding, assuring her half-sister that she had no involvement in the rebellion. Her calm sincerity, coupled with her careful choice of words, convinced Mary that Elizabeth posed no threat. Within days, the conditions of her imprisonment were relaxed, and she was transferred from the Tower to house arrest at Woodstock Manor, where she would remain under watchful guard for nearly a year. The psychological ramifications of this ordeal left an indelible mark on Elizabeth's character. She emerged from the Tower with an acute awareness of how swiftly fortune could turn. No longer was she a carefree princess awaiting her turn on the throne. She had tasted the terror of impending death and felt the bitter sting of betrayal by those closest to power. The experience sharpened her political instincts, teaching her the necessity of cultivating unwavering loyalty among her supporters and the importance of forging alliances across religious and social divides. Elizabeth's near execution also influenced her diplomatic approach in later years. She became adept at masking her true intentions behind layers of courteous speech and ritual, maintaining a calm exterior even as inner turmoil roiled. Her renowned patience in council sessions and her deliberate pacing in making critical decisions can be traced back to the survival tactics she employed in the Tower, where a hasty word or gesture might have sealed her fate. Every measured pause and carefully crafted letter was a testament to the lessons learned in those bleak months, that diplomacy, caution, and shrewd perception were as vital to sovereignty as any army or navy. Moreover, the trauma of being so close to the executioner forged in Elizabeth a compelling public image, the immortal queen, ever vigilant and ever aware that her authority rested on the precarious balance of power. She cultivated the aura of an unshakable monarch, projecting confidence and composure even in moments of crisis. By doing so, she discouraged would-be usurpers and reinforced the notion that her rule, though hard-won, was unassailable. The legend of her chilling brush with death became part of her court's whispered lore, reminding all who heard it that the queen had stared into the abyss and had emerged stronger for it. In the end, Elizabeth's Tower imprisonment became a crucible of transformation. The terror of facing execution at her sister's command, amidst accusations of treason and the threat of yew-wood benches and nooses, culminated in a deeper appreciation for the art of statecraft. Her long years of house arrest at Woodstock allowed time for reflection, study, and strategy, solidifying her resolve never to appear vulnerable again. When Mary died and Elizabeth took the throne, she did so not as the naive daughter of a disgraced queen, but as a monarch tempered by adversity, who understood that true power lay not only in armies and ships, but in the unwavering fortitude of the human spirit. And so, the seventh terrifying truth of Elizabeth I reveals itself. The near miss with the executioner under her half-sister's reign was more than a brush with death. It was the forge in which her political acumen and indomitable will were hardened. In the cold cells of the Tower, Elizabeth learned that the knife of betrayal could strike at any moment, and from that knowledge, she built the steady hand and resolute mind that would guide England through its golden age. Terrifying truth number 8. Darkened lights. Dress code for LRDESIN. VRITING. Imagine the muted glow of candlelight in the vast, echoing halls of Whitehall Palace, where each torch flickers against walls hung with tapestries depicting Tudor triumphs. In that setting, Elizabeth I's jewels glinting in her crimson velvet gown, pearls draping her neckline like dew would inspect her ladies-in-waiting with a discerning eye. They were the constant companions at her side, attendants of noble birth, accustomed to the finest brocades and embroidered silks. And yet, despite her own reputation for opulence, Elizabeth imposed a strict edict. Her ladies were to dress only in black or white, their garments deliberately plain and subdued. This darkened lights dress code ensured that no fabric, no ornament, could ever outshine the Queen herself, making her radiance the sole focus of every courtly gaze. Elizabeth's own wardrobe was legendary. Well over 2,000 pairs of gloves, gowns of richest damask and satin, sparkling with jewels and metallic thread, and enough pearls and diamonds to fill a small treasury. Yet, in the presence of her attendants, those who spent their days arranging her ruffs and smoothing the train of her gown, she demanded austerity. Imagine the scene. The Queen stands resplendent in an embroidered kirtle with every fold accentuated by candles' glow, while her ladies arrayed behind her are clad in unrelieved black or stark white. Their attire was so subdued, no coloured ribbons, no patterned sleeves, that they seemed almost spectres in her aura of colour and light. In so doing, Elizabeth reinforced her singular position as the centre of courtly attention. But this was no mere fashion whim. Rather, the dress code functioned as a psychological tool of absolute control. By rendering her ladies all but invisible, Elizabeth ensured that every glance, every whisper of silk, led inevitably back to her. In effect, she created a human spotlight that shone relentlessly on her alone. Court psychologists of later centuries might note this as an extreme manifestation of power dynamics at play. By diminishing the presence of those around her, the Queen amplified her own magnetism and cemented her status as the unrivaled sovereign. For the ladies forced into monochrome, the experience could be demoralizing. Clad in drab simplicity, they might feel a sense of inferiority or dependence, acutely aware that their worth lay not in their own qualities, but in how well they underscored the Queen's preeminence. Evidence suggests that some ladies-in-waiting chafed under this rule. Contemporary letters and private diaries, though heavily censored, hint at whispered complaints about the stifling uniformity. One note, scrawled in a coded cipher, lamented that, "Our colours are as lifeless as the stones we polish for her crown." Such resentments, however, never found voice in public. Breaching the dress code risked more than reproach, for it threatened to challenge the carefully maintained hierarchy. Elizabeth's edict was clear. Any deviation, any hint of gaudy ribbon or coloured bodice, would be met with sudden displeasure, possibly even banishment from court. Psychologists analysing this dynamic might describe it as a form of visual subjugation. By imposing a uniform, colourless appearance on her attendants, Elizabeth effectively controlled their self-image and their interactions. It was as though she locked them in a cage of cloth devoid of personality, making them wholly disposable shadows in her luminous presence. This tactic ensured that courtiers could not compete visually or symbolically, solidifying Elizabeth's absolute singularity. Indeed, no nobleman or lady dared risk colourful attire, for the consequences cold stares, whispered reprimands, or worse, were not worth overshadowing the Queen's brightness. In the broader context of politics, this dress code served as a soft power strategy, an unspoken weapon that consolidated her dominance without overt violence. Gentle reminders at daily levees, subtle facial expressions, or even the careful design of a new gown communicated that Elizabeth's will extended to the very fabric of her court. She harnessed the language of clothing to project authority, making fashion an extension of her command. By controlling what her ladies wore, she controlled the mood and focus of the entire court. This edict also reinforced Elizabeth's image as an untouchable, almost otherworldly figure. Amid a sea of black and white, she stood alone in vibrant splendour, a solitary beacon of power. The effect was theatrical. Every entrance she made was akin to the rising of the sun over a dark horizon. The stark contrast between her attire and that of her attendants spoke volumes without a single word. Courtiers learned to anticipate her arrival not only by the hush that fell over the hall, but by the absence of colour that preceded her. In that moment, the Queen's grandeur became almost mythic. Yet behind this display lay pragmatic shrewdness. Elizabeth understood that a monarch's visibility was currency. In a world without mass media, courtly ceremonies and public appearances were critical channels of communication. By monopolizing the visual spectacle, she prevented any rival, be it a duke, a foreign diplomat, or an ambitious cousin, from taking center stage. Even fleeting moments of incongruous brightness among her attendants might have sent ripples of intrigue or jealousy through the nobility. The dress code, eliminated that risk entirely. Elizabeth's demand for monochrome attire may have been severe, but it was not absolute. On certain state occasions, royal weddings, coronations, and major religious festivals, she would temporarily relax the rule, allowing her ladies to don muted jewel tones or silver brocade. However, these allowances were always orchestrated to emphasize her own garments. Coordinating palettes ensured that, even then, she emerged as the unrivaled star. When the rule returned to its strict black and white regimen, the contrast served as a reminder of her benevolence in granting exceptions, reinforcing both her power and her munificence. In closing, the eighth terrifying truth of Elizabeth I reveals a queen who wielded fashion as a psychological instrument of control. By enforcing a darkened lights dress code that muted the presence of her ladies-in-waiting, she commanded absolute visual dominance. This austere edict was not mere vanity, but a masterful exercise of soft power. It magnified her aura, subdued potential rivals, and shaped the court's perception of authority. Even as Elizabeth's silken brocades dazzled, the stark silhouettes of her attendants whispered an unmistakable message. There could be only one queen in the tapestry of Tudor power. Terrifying truth number 9. Secret of scarred skin and toxic macube. In the pale mornings of the Tudor court, when sunlight filtered softly through the stained glass windows of Whitehall Palace, Elizabeth I would prepare for her day before a gilded mirror. There, amid the flutter of delicate lace and the rustle of silken skirts, she faced a truth no amount of royal privilege could fully erase. Her once flawless complexion was marred by countless pitted scars. In her youth, Elizabeth's skin had been celebrated for its porcelain smoothness and natural radiance, but a devastating outbreak of smallpox had left deep, permanent marks on her cheeks and forehead. The disease had also claimed clumps of her hair, forcing her to rely on elaborate wigs. Determined never to reveal what she considered the most unqueenly aspect of her appearance, Elizabeth turned to the cosmetic practices of her time, a fateful decision that would unleash a cycle of toxicity and dependence. At the heart of her beauty regimen was Venetian ceruse, a heavily leaded mixture of finely ground white lead and vinegar. This powder, favoured throughout Europe as the height of cosmetic innovation, promised to restore a luminous, youthful pallor, an indispensable attribute for a monarch who depended on her visage to convey divine favour and unassailable authority. Each morning, Elizabeth's appointed servants would carefully apply a thick layer of this chalky paste across every inch of her face, smoothing over the depressions and dark spots that lingered from smallpox. The initial effect was striking. The Queen's skin appeared immaculate, almost ethereal, as though sculpted from marble. Visitors and courtiers, accustomed to the traces of age and illness that marked even the highest-born, marvelled at her porcelain allure. However, lead is a heavy metal, and beneath the surface of that gleaming white mask, it seeped steadily into Elizabeth's skin. Modern dermatologists recognize that protracted exposure to lead-based makeup can cause chronic inflammation, weakening the skin's natural defenses and worsening existing scars. Elizabeth, striving to conceal every hint of imperfection, would layer on increasingly thicker coats of Venetian ceruse. Each new application masked the stubborn discoloration and pitted texture, but also stifled her pores, causing her skin to react with redness, irritation, and ultimately more scarring. The Queen had inadvertently trapped herself in a vicious cycle. The more she sought to erase her smallpox marks, the more she deepened them. Psychologists studying the phenomenon of compulsive concealment observe that such behavior often stems from a profound fear of judgment, especially in high-stakes environments. For Elizabeth, whose very identity was bound to her image as sovereign, the prospect of revealing scarred skin in public was unthinkable. She believed that any sign of physical flaw might be interpreted as a weakness in her rule, an opening for foreign powers or domestic rivals to question her strength. Thus, she pressed on with leaded face paint, sacrificing her skin's health to preserve the regal illusion. As the years advanced, Elizabeth's reliance on her white mask became more pronounced. Portrait painters, working under strict royal instruction, depicted her with smooth, unblemished features, reinforcing the artifice. In these commissioned works, her hairline was flawlessly drawn, her cheeks unmarked by the ravages of smallpox, and her lips the soft curve of perfect beauty. These idealized images circulated among foreign emissaries and courtiers alike, setting the standard for the Virgin Queen's appearance. In reality, however, Elizabeth's face beneath the paint had become thin and gaunt, the flesh beneath her wigs and veils betraying the toxic legacy of heavy metals. By the end of her reign, Elizabeth rarely appeared at public ceremonies without a thick, white visage and a towering wig to conceal her natural hair. Observers noted that even the slightest breeze could dissolve a streak of ceruse, leaving a dark line that would panic her attendants, prompting hurried reapplication. The Queen would press her jewelled ring to her cheek, checking for smudges, while her ladies-in-waiting stood at the ready with fresh puffs of powder. The image of a mighty monarch, adored for her composure and wit, struggling beneath layers of deadly paint, underscores the precariousness of appearing invulnerable in a court where every gesture was scrutinized. Elizabeth's tragic dependency on toxic makeup speaks to the extreme pressures faced by a woman forging a path in a patriarchal world. As queen, she had to embody an ideal of perfection, unwavering in judgment, resplendent in bearing, and unmarred by the ailments that afflicted lesser mortals. Society demanded she present an image so immaculate that no rival might exploit a single flaw. From this crucible of expectation emerged her obsessive use of Venetian ceruse, a practice now known to cause systemic health problems including bone weakness, cognitive impairment, and eventually an exacerbation of the very scars she sought to hide. Yet, despite the physical toll, Elizabeth never abandoned her makeup. It became, in essence, an armor as vital as any of her state regalia. The thick white layer, the towering wigs, and the veils she sometimes wore in later years were all part of an intricate facade, layers of artistry designed to mask vulnerability. This relentless investment in outward perfection shaped the public's perception, ensuring that the Queen's smile remained enigmatic, never fully revealing the woman beneath. In the rare moments of solitude, perhaps in the early dawn hours before the court stirred, Elizabeth would sit quietly in her private chamber, gazing at the powder-stained cloths and brushes arrayed before her. She might pause to touch her cheeks beneath the layers of paint, feeling the hardness of the leaded mask against her skin. These solitary gestures of self-assessment were as much ritual as reflection, a testament to the inner torment of a monarch who dared not show weakness. Thus, the ninth terrifying truth of Elizabeth I emerges. Beneath the crown and the opulent gowns lay a woman haunted by the physical scars of childhood disease, driven to extreme measures to maintain the facade of perfection. Her use of Venetian ceruse, a toxic makeup beloved by the aristocracy, became both her shield and her poison, illustrating the dark interplay between beauty, power, and the human cost of unattainable ideals. In the end, Elizabeth's obsession with concealing her scars reveals a profound vulnerability. Even a queen of unmatched authority cannot escape the inescapable laws of mortality and appearance. Terrifying truth number 10. The queen who encouraged piracy by licensing privateers. In the annals of Elizabethan history, the reign of Elizabeth I is often celebrated as a golden age of art, exploration, and cultural flourishing. Yet beneath that resplendent veneer lay a darker chapter: the rise of state-sanctioned piracy, a policy by which the Crown explicitly encouraged English privateers to plunder Spanish ships and enrich the realm with gold and silver from the New World. Elizabeth did not declare open war against Spain, an act that might have embroiled England in disastrous conflict, but instead issued letters of marque to daring sea captains, effectively turning them into legally endorsed pirates on behalf of the Queen. By granting these privateering commissions, Elizabeth transformed individuals like Sir Francis Drake and Sir Walter Raleigh into instruments of national policy. Drake, famed for circumnavigating the globe, relied heavily on prize ships captured from Spanish treasure convoys. Raleigh, too, outfitted expeditions that seized Spanish vessels and claimed their bounty. With every seized galleon, they sent home chests of bullion, pearls, and exotic spices, inflating the royal coffers and undermining Spain's maritime dominance. Upon his return to Plymouth in 1586, Drake presented Elizabeth with a chest containing the jewels and gold looted from a captured Spanish galleon off the coast of Panama, an act so celebrated that she purportedly knighted him aboard his ship, declaring, "I pronounce thee Sir Francis Drake." This practice lay squarely outside the bounds of traditional international law. Under the prevailing norms, piracy was a criminal offence punishable by death. Yet by reclassifying these actions as privateering authorized attacks on enemy vessels, Elizabeth ensured that her captains were immune from piracy charges, provided they held an official letter of marque and remitted a share of their spoils to the crown. This arrangement allowed her to weaken Spain's colonial trade network without committing England's own navy to full-scale war, a bold strategy that yielded massive dividends. Indeed, the influx of precious metals and goods from privateers enriched the Tudor economy, financed naval expansion, and fueled the patronage of art and learning that defined the Elizabethan Golden Age. From a psychological perspective, this policy reveals Elizabeth's shrewd pragmatism. She valued national interest above conventional morality, willing to blur the lines between crime and statecraft. By elevating privateers to the status of national heroes, complete with portraits in golden frames and lavish rewards, she harnessed popular sentiment. The same men who once were scorned as thieves transformed into patriotic icons, their exploits celebrated in ballads and court festivities. This reframing created a powerful sense of collective identity. Our pirates, our profits, our glory became an unspoken mantra among the English populace. Moreover, Elizabeth's endorsement of privateering had a magnetic effect on the public imagination. Tales of daring sea battles, plundered Spanish galleons, and vast riches captured from the world's most powerful maritime empire captivated the popular press and galvanized support for the Crown's maritime ambitions. These stories reinforced the perception of England as an up-and-coming naval power, fostering national pride and unity. Children sang songs celebrating Drake's exploits. Merchants invested in privateering ventures, hoping to share in the profits. And poets penned verses praising the Queen's cunning in outwitting Spain. In this way, piracy under royal license became a symbol of English ingenuity and resolve. However, the policy carried inherent risks. Privateers, by their very nature, operated on the edge of legality. Some captains pushed the boundaries too far, attacking neutral or even English vessels when Spanish prizes proved elusive. Diplomatic incidents arose, threatening fragile alliances with other European powers. To maintain control, Elizabeth exercised careful oversight. She required detailed reports of captures, enforced a regulated share of spoils for the treasury, and occasionally revoked commissions from rogue captains. This delicate balance, allowing bold action while preventing outright chaos, demonstrated her skill in managing the unintended consequences of empowering men accustomed to acting on their own initiative. Psychologically, Elizabeth's willingness to play dirty reveals a leader who understood that moral purism can be a luxury of the powerless. Confronted with Spain's vast empire and immense naval resources, she chose guile over brute force. Instead of launching a costly war that might have bankrupted England, she weaponized law and reputation to achieve her aims. This approach underscores her adaptability. She was neither averse to unconventional methods nor constrained by rigid ethics when the nation's interests were at stake. Additionally, the state-sponsored piracy fostered a sense of calculated boldness within the English naval tradition. Generations of seamen grew up hearing stories of their forebears' exploits under letters of marque, inspiring a culture of daring and resilience that would later fuel the establishment of the British Empire. The psychological legacy of privateering, valorizing risk-taking, rewarding initiative, and normalizing asymmetric tactics became embedded in English maritime identity. Yet for all its benefits, the privateering policy could be brutal in its human cost. Spanish sailors, colonists, and enslaved peoples aboard ill-fated vessels suffered violence and dispossession. The dark undercurrents of Elizabeth's golden age included the suffering of those caught in the crossfire of her strategic gambit. While England's coffers swelled and her people cheered, the victims of these sanctioned raids paid the price. This moral complexity speaks to the duality of Elizabeth's reign, a period of cultural brilliance, also marred by shades of complicity in maritime plunder and human suffering. In the final analysis, the 10th terrifying truth of Elizabeth I emerges. She was a queen who deliberately blurred the line between piracy and patriotism, issuing royal commissions to men who would otherwise be branded criminals. By harnessing these privateers, she dealt a crippling blow to Spain's maritime supremacy, financed her navy, and ignited the imaginations of her people. Yet in doing so, she embraced a form of statecraft that embraced moral ambiguity, valuing national gain over universal ethics. In Elizabeth's hands, piracy was not a relic of lawlessness, but a potent instrument of empire, a testament to her unflinching pragmatism and her willingness to play dirty to secure England's place on the world stage. Terrifying truth number 12. Execution of a relative and the beheading of Mary, Queen of Scots. In the quiet hours before dawn, Elizabeth I would lie awake in her bedchamber, listening to the distant hoot of an owl and the soft clatter of a guard's patrol. Though the court was renowned for its pageantry and learning, beneath that grandeur lurked a grim obsession: the security of the crown. From the moment Elizabeth had tasted imprisonment in the Tower of London under her half-sister, Mary I, she understood how swiftly loyalty could curdle into betrayal. Determined never to again face the executioner's block as a prisoner, Elizabeth commissioned Sir Francis Walsingham to weave a web of intelligence so fine it reached into every corner of her realm and beyond. Walsingham, Elizabeth's principal secretary and most trusted confidant, became the architect of this clandestine network. Operating from a discreet chamber in Whitehall Palace, he employed cryptographers to decode intercepted letters, recruited informants in English ports, and coordinated with agents in Catholic strongholds across Europe. They tracked exiled noblemen plotting on the continent, monitored Jesuit missionaries for signs of sedition, and maintained a constant vigil over potential conspirators. By the mid-1580s, Walsingham's operatives had established safe houses in major cities, clandestine courier routes, and ciphers so intricate that only the Queen herself could approve decryption keys. Elizabeth's reliance on this secret service reflected a deep-seated paranoia, fueled by her early brush with danger. She had witnessed her mother, Anne Boleyn, fall victim to a sudden court conspiracy, and she had endured her own imprisonment under Bloody Mary. These experiences instilled in her a relentless fear of treason and a conviction that unwavering vigilance was essential. Every intercepted letter, every decoded message, fed into her growing conviction that the throne's security rested on the swift detection of plots before they could blossom into rebellions. The most fateful test of Walsingham's network came with the threat posed by Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots. Mary, Elizabeth's first cousin once removed, and daughter of Henry II of France, had fled to England in 1568, seeking protection. Yet her presence became a rallying point for Catholic plots to overthrow Elizabeth and restore England to the Pope's authority. Over the years, Mary's correspondence with conspirators ranging from the Duke of Norfolk's attempted uprising to the Babington plot was meticulously intercepted and decrypted by Walsingham's team. The Babington plot of 1586 proved the final straw. Plans to abduct or assassinate Elizabeth, aided by Spanish and papal support, were laid bare in letters coded with innocent-looking symbols. Walsingham's operatives breached the cipher, exposing Mary's direct involvement. The evidence was so damning that even Elizabeth, whose heart ached at the prospect of executing a close relative, could not remain merciful. In February of 1587, Mary was tried for treason at Fotheringhay Castle. Despite pleas for clemency from various European courts, Elizabeth, torn between familial love and dynastic necessity, signed the death warrant. On a chilly October morning in 1587, Mary Stuart was led to the scaffold. She wore a crimson petticoat beneath a white satin gown, a symbolic inversion of life and death. With her last words, she declared her innocence, but the silent blade fell swiftly, ending her life and signalling Elizabeth's ruthless resolve. The execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, sent shockwaves through Europe, but effectively eliminated the most potent Catholic claimant to the English throne. From a psychological standpoint, Elizabeth's decision reveals a queen whose dread of betrayal outweighed even the bonds of kinship. She understood that the stability of her reign depended on the perception of absolute authority. By sanctioning her cousin's execution, Elizabeth drew a line in the sand. No one, not even a member of her own family, could imperil the nation's security without facing the ultimate penalty. The careful orchestration of Mary's downfall, entirely dependent on Walsingham's intelligence network, underscored the centrality of information control to Elizabethan statecraft. The combination of Walsingham's covert operations and Elizabeth's willingness to act decisively created a political climate where conspiracies were thwarted before they could flourish. Courtiers grew wary of penning letters that might be intercepted. Foreign envoys tempered their discourse, knowing it could be reported directly to the Queen. This pervasive atmosphere of surveillance and swift reprisal cultivated a grudging respect and fear that helped sustain the Tudor regime through religious wars, Spanish threats, and domestic unrest. Yet the cost was high. The execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, haunted Elizabeth in her final years. Letters reveal moments of private remorse, where she lamented the necessity of condemning a woman who, in any other context, might have been an ally. Several of her ladies-in-waiting later recounted that Elizabeth's composure sometimes gave way to tears when alone, suggesting that the psychological toll of ordering a kinswoman's death was profound. Despite the personal anguish, Elizabeth never wavered from her course. She continued to rely on Walsingham's network until his death in 1590, understanding that the intelligence he provided was the lifeblood of her government. Her successors inherited this model, evolving it into more formal espionage agencies that would shape English and later British intelligence traditions. Thus unfolds the 12th terrifying truth of Elizabeth I. In a reign defined by cultural brilliance, a queen haunted by past persecution built a formidable spy network and did not hesitate to execute her own kin when their plots threatened the realm. It was a stark reminder that in the ruthless Game of Thrones, loyalty was a commodity to be verified, and the ultimate betrayal could only be answered with the most irrevocable of measures, death. As the glow of candlelight softens around the edges of our tale, we can allow our hearts to slow, our breaths to deepen, and the last echoes of royal footsteps to recede into a distant memory. In those grand palace halls where power and intrigue wove themselves through every tapestry and whispered behind every gilded door, we have glimpsed both the brilliance and the burdens of Elizabeth's reign. Yet now, as night falls gently across the centuries, we step back from the high drama of crowns and plots to linger in the quiet space between pulse and pause. Imagine that same grand chamber, bathed not in torchlight but in the silver hush of moonbeams slipping through arched windows. The echo of swords and secrets fades, replaced by the soft sigh of curtains stirring in a gentle breeze. Our thoughts drift, like motes of dust dancing in pale light, away from the harsh clang of power struggles to the timeless rhythm of your own breathing. As Elizabeth's story settles behind us, we carry forward its richest message, that even the greatest among us are shaped by vulnerability, guided by conviction, and sustained by the hope sometimes fragile, sometimes fierce, that our choices, however difficult, can brighten the world in their own way. In the end, what remains is less about thrones or triumphs, but more about the human heart's capacity for resilience. From scarred skin to secret tears, from whispered curses to whispered prayers, Elizabeth's life reminds us that strength and tenderness, power and compassion are threads of the same tapestry. We learn that to lead with courage sometimes demands the hardest decisions, yet to remember our own humanity, our connections, our losses, our love, is what gives any crown its true weight. So let us breathe together in this gentle dawn of understanding. Let the stories of ambition and sacrifice fade like a distant song, leaving only the soft refrain of empathy and awe. And as your eyelids grow heavy, know that here, in this space between night and day, you are safe, you are heard, and you are part of a shared journey that spans the ages. Sleep now, with the quiet comfort of history's wisdom wrapped around your shoulders. May your dreams be filled with calm reflections, warm hopes, and the gentle promise of tomorrow. And when you awaken, may you carry with you a spark of curiosity, a glimmer of courage, and a reminder that every story, no matter how grand or grievous, holds within it the power to illuminate and inspire. Good night. And if you've enjoyed this voyage through time, please subscribe to our channel for more tranquil journeys and the very best stories yet to come. Sweet dreams.